So, welcome to our commercial real estate series titled Behind the Building, uncovering the strategy, the people, and decisions that shape commercial real estate. I love connecting with people, I love commercial real estate, and I enjoy teaching. So, by hosting these interviews, I hope to give the audience a behind the scenes look at different aspects of commercial real estate, featuring industry professionals and leaders who we work with every day to make it all happen. In this segment, we are covering the dirt on due diligence. Here with me to talk about why digging in the dirt is so important is John Lair, Director of Environmental Services with ECS, a firm that specializes in environmental consulting. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be
Yeah,
here.
yeah. So, can you share a bit about your role and what ECS does in the commercial real estate world?
So ECS is an engineering and environmental consulting firm that we've been around since 1988, and here in the Carolinas since the mid 1990s. So as a consulting firm, we assist with real estate transactions and real estate development as it pertains to engineering and environmental concerns. We assist our clients by evaluating their environmental risks and help them make the best business decision that they can when um, acquiring that real estate and developing it.
Okay. So most brokers and owners have heard of a phase one ESA. You have to explain what an ESA is. I'm all about unwrapping the abbreviations in people's industries. But what does it entail exactly?
Sure. So a phase one environmental site assessment is a industry standard report, and it's an evaluation of the commercial real estate in question. Um, there is a standard that the industry practices. So what that entails is a thorough evaluation of the history and regulatory status of the real estate. So what do we do in that? Right. So we're going to go out there and look at historical records for the property. Are there any environmental concerns through that historical information that leads us to pause and identify some potential red flags for liability concerns?
Mhm.
We look at regulatory records. We're going to evaluate, are there any documented contamination issues on the property, on the adjoining property that might impact the property? And then, of course, we walk the site, right? We're going to walk the site and kick the dirt, and we're going to look around the perimeter of the property. We're going to look at several transects of the property. We're going to go inside buildings, outside buildings, and we're going to look for obvious indicators of potential environmental concerns to help our client make the best business decision that they can in investing in that real estate and their proposed development.
Great. So at what point do they usually get you involved? When do they call you in?
Well, that's a good
Like when they
question.
smell something, when they look at something, some trash, gas, a big tank. What
That's
are
a,
they?
that's a great question, and it's a different response for different people, right? Everybody's different. The easiest answer is the sooner the better. You're looking at that piece of dirt, you're taking it under consideration, and you really have your heart set on it. Now's the time. Sooner the better, because the environmental it takes a couple of weeks to get the environmental site assessment completed. But the sooner you get that information in your hand and identify environmental risk, the sooner you can advance the other critical uh, tasks that you need to complete that acquisition.
Mhm.
We really work hand in glove with a lot of other professionals, including civil engineers that are also looking for land planning on the site and for redevelopment or new development. So understanding it as soon as possible is critical.
Okay. And so I know about the phase two. When does it, warrant going into that phase two ESA?
Wonderful. Um, Typically, phase twos are completed to address red flags that a phase one environmental site assessment will identify. Um, Again, phase ones and phase twos, they're not a requirement. There's no checkbox that says you have to have one, unless, of course, you're a lending institution. Um, banks and lenders and private equity require it. And typically they are requiring it because they're protecting their collateral, of course. So that said, phase twos are generally done to rule out or confirm the presence or absence of contamination that might be identified during a phase one environmental site assessment.
Okay. So what kind of deals have you seen saved or lost as a result of your findings in the field?
Well, again, it's a great question. The intent is to separate fact from fiction, right? So there may be hearsay through people that live in the area that this site used to be an old gas station, but there's no real evidence when you drive by that it ever was. So doing your due diligence can reveal these things that might identify contamination that says, whoa, this site is a Superfund site. This site is known contamination and there's plenty of it. And the degree of that contamination will really prevent me from doing what I want to do on this property without extensive costs to remediate or make the site safe for its intended reuse. So there's always solutions to environmental concerns, of course. Each has its own merit and each has its own place in time and cost. So every buyer of commercial real estate, developer of commercial real estate has different business decisions that they need to entertain. But at the same time, we've had various situations across my career at ECS where a client has gone in to look at the dirt and the environmental conditions on the site has caused them pause, has caused them to reconsider the nature of their development or just moving on and looking for another site.
Mhm. Because it is about what that future planned use will be. If it was a gas station or a dry cleaner, you may not be approved or be able to feasibly mitigate a site for a daycare, something like that, right?
Correct. And I get it. You're in the commercial real estate world, right? It's location, location, location. So depending on the site, depending on the end use that's proposed, the numbers might work out to move forward with a project that might have environmental challenges, that you might have to spend a little bit more money to get the site safe through a variety of remedial approaches, institutional controls on the real estate that make the site safe for its intended reuse. That could be pursuing brownfields agreements for liability protections and tax incentives. It could be just putting land use restrictions on the site that restrict the types of reuse you can do on the real estate. Again, no one's requiring the real estate to be for the developer or the buyer to do a phase one. But one way to look at this is if you're trying to purchase, develop, then flip the property. And your risk tolerance is very low, right? You're going to move forward, maybe not do that phase one environmental, or maybe not do a phase two environmental on that site. That's a business decision that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to caution everybody is when you try to flip that property in 5 years, are the buyers that come in at that point going to have the same risk tolerances that you do?
Right.
And if you don't do your due diligence, there is risk, of course, that future buyers might identify something. And while it may not be your fault, you're now the owner of that real estate. And while it may not be you may not be considered the responsible party for that problem in environmental, you might just have to deal with it though, because you own the real estate.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a couple of words earlier, Superfund site and brownfields. Can you explain what those mean and how you all work through those?
Well, sure. So Superfund falls under the federal government, right? That is CERCLA. And it's a program at the state that or at the feds that generally take over responsibility for managing the contamination when a responsible party is no longer there, right? No, they're either dissolved as an entity or they no longer own the real estate that they work to make that to remediate that site and get it clean enough for its intended reuse. Brownfields falls under that program. Brownfields is a program administered by the federal government through the EPA. It's more of a economic development program that overlaps with environmental. And so the intended program of brownfields is to identify sites with real or perceived risk, which may be causing the site to lay fallow, to be undeveloped. People are nervous about it. They're concerned about the environmental risk that they might have. Brownfields programs, should you be eligible, provides a user, a buyer, with tax incentives, liability protections, provided that the site is made safe for its intended reuse. Brownfields program is really an ideal program because it does not necessarily require remediation. There may be controls that can be put in place, engineering controls, institutional controls that make the site safe.
Is that like the ongoing monitoring that I see sometimes?
Brownfields can have ongoing monitoring, but generally not.
Okay.
There may be common things that we see in brownfields programs are capping contaminated material, whether that's through impervious surfaces like asphalt pavements, concrete, buildings, um, or a layer of clean material, clean soil that's brought in and to cap it. The intent is to keep people away from encountering that contaminated material. Often we see, especially if the intended reuse is residential in nature, common things that we see in brownfields programs is the requirement to do vapor mitigation evaluation. Are the contaminants in the subsurface migrating through the soil as a gas and then getting trapped and entering in the buildings and potentially a hazard to the occupants?
So
So,
that's your vapor intrusion
absolutely.
mitigation? Okay.
So, some of the things that we do in a phase two and why we do, of course, we talked a little bit about why we do them, right? We're trying to determine the presence or absence. And the things that we're commonly doing is we're collecting soil samples, we're collecting groundwater samples, and we're collecting soil gas samples. And for us to, at the end of the day, ideally we want to clean phase two, right? That's what everybody hopes for. But the reality is that we often find contaminants in the soil, in the groundwater, in soil gas, and it's our duty to evaluate those, compare them to known federal and state standards, and understand the risk tolerance, the risks that those pose to the intended reuse. Right.
Right.
That's the charge of us professional geologists and engineers. It's the charge of the regulatory agencies that regulate the contamination. So so there's various things that we can do. And then, of course, with residential, which is more of the high risk end use, there tends to be more stringent regulatory standards for us to meet, of course, because we have long-term exposure of people occupying those structures. So that the level of scrutiny we have to do and thresholds that we have to meet are much more stringent for residential redevelopment.
So speaking of those kinds of regulations, have there been any recent changes or are there upcoming changes that could be, pending that we need to be made aware of, developers and commercial real estate owners?
Well, I think the biggest thing impacting our industry right now, and this is nationally, it's PFAS. Okay, PFAS. What is that? Right. So it's a series of man-made chemicals that were developed, you know, honestly during the Manhattan Project. They're commonly referred to as emerging contaminants or forever chemicals. These are compounds known as per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're very good at what they were designed to do. They're water resistant, oil resistant, fire resistance, and because they're very strong bonds in their atomic structure. So that's great for their intended use, right? So we often found them in common products, Teflon,
Um,
Gore-Tex, firefighting foams that they use at airports or fire stations to put out fires on a variety of types of things. We see them in fast food packaging.
Oh,
right? We used to see them in dental floss, right? With the nature of Teflon being involved in that. So, you know, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And that's posing some real challenges in our industry, especially as it pertains to environmental due diligence.
mhm.
A few years ago now, PFAS began to be regulated as a hazardous substance. And when it met that criteria by the EPA, it now falls into what we look for in a phase one environmental site assessment, and that's recognized environmental conditions, right? So we call them RECs.
Mhm.
It can wreck a site, right? Of course, or it can wreck a deal. But boss, it's everywhere. So whereas if we're looking at a site, for instance, an old gas station, you referred to dry cleaners earlier. Those are known sources. They've been around. Our industry is mature, and we understand those obvious environmental hazards. Petroleum products, chlorinated solvents associated with dry cleaners, but this new thing is out there, and it's PFAS. So where the challenge is with that, it's everywhere. All of our waste materials that we generate in our households, in our businesses, in our industries, generally end up in a landfill with the leachates coming out, and that's a big giant source of PFAS contamination in many locations. And it's challenging for our industry and for the regulators trying to evaluate the source and clean up. We're seeing it a lot in biosolids, right? So a lot of municipalities over the years, wastewater treatment plants would, under permit from the regulators, allow some of these biosolids to be spread on agricultural fields for growing non-human consumption crops. Well, that can cause a problem, right? Because if there's PFAS in the sludge, in the biosolids, now it's getting spread onto areas where we would normally, in evaluating real estate, not be concerned, right? It's a farm field. We don't care. Well, now
Right,
we have to evaluate were any of these sites approved, permitted biosolid receiving farm fields, right? So
right,
those are just unique challenges that we're seeing now that we didn't see 3 to 5 years ago. And
right.
so our industry is really working hard to get in front of it, make common sense decisions on identifying PFAS as a wreck. Because if you test for it, you're likely going to find it. And so we have to be practical and pragmatic about
Right.
calling out PFAS as a concern.
You don't want to red flag it if it's just not really a
Well, if we, really
concern.
what we're looking for are the real sources,
Hmm.
right? Is there a source on site? Is there a source adjoining the property that's in reasonable proximity where we might suspect contamination? Otherwise, yes, we can say it's ubiquitous to the environment. It's probably in your blood and my blood right now. Um, but we have to be realists. We can't grind our economy to a halt because we say that it's ubiquitous. We have to use common sense and best management practices when evaluating these potential concerns.
Makes sense. So, related to just the environmental risks that you're looking at and looking for, and in the end, trying to mitigate, how does that all tie into property insurance that we're trying to secure for these properties and lender decisions? You touched on it a little bit with the lender's requirement to have the phase one generally.
Yeah, so people always ask me that question: Do I need a phase one? Well, I'm in the industry. I know the answer for myself. If I'm buying commercial real estate, I'm getting a phase one environmental site assessment. Now, again, we have to be pragmatic about it. Lenders are looking at, they want to lend the borrower money to do a project, to buy the real estate, to develop the property. They have their own, every bank's got their own unique thresholds, right? There may be some known uses of the site, current or historic, and there might be a loan value. Typically, a lot of lenders will set a floor of about $1 million. If you're going to
Hmm.
borrow $1 million or more on that, that will likely trigger an environmental review. Often, that they're probably doing an environmental review internally anyway. They're doing some ordering some regulatory reports, doing a cursory review, and then if that cursory review warrants them triggering a full blown phase one requirement, then that's what they'll ask of their borrower. There are insurance programs that various insurance carriers have for environmental policies. Um, we don't see that all that often. It has to be a unique situation where insurance carriers will basically put the risk on the policy. But those are things worth talking to the insurance companies about. Um, we're not an insurance company, so I can't speak,
Right. Right.
entirely to the how those work, what their mechanisms are. And of course, Brownfields is a vehicle for evaluating and protecting that risk and protecting that liability. We often work with the law firms, right, that are helping close that real estate. So they're often ones going to be scrutinizing that title insurance. Are there any encumbrances on that real estate from an environmental perspective? There could be a legacy leaking petroleum uh, record on the deed of the property, and
Mhm.
that deed and that record might say you cannot use the site for residential purposes. You cannot use groundwater for any purposes, and that's into perpetuity until the conditions change. Right. So those are certainly valuable things, and we do review those liens and records when we're doing an environmental site assessment.
There seems to be so many details that you're digging into, not just from the history, but you're digging into the dirt and you're collaborating with all these providers. What other industry professionals are you working with to help convey this property for, a transaction and confirm all your findings?
Well, Emily, that's a great question. People like yourself, right? Commercial real estate professionals. They're top of the list. Now we often will work with lending institutions, banks, right? They have questions. They'll scratch their heads. Some of them have their own internal environmental review board
Mm.
professionals that they have in house, and sometimes they just come straight to the consultant to better understand the issues that we identified. But we work with the other professionals that are also helping to look at that dirt. We're looking with civil engineers. They're trying to do land planning. They're looking at, and something we haven't really talked about on this call is wetlands, right?
Oh. Mhm.
So, and of course, our company often provides geotechnical engineering services as well. So, for undeveloped sites, you asked me earlier, what things can kill a deal? Well, environmental can kill a deal. Widespread wetlands on a property can really restrict the usable area on a property without extensive permitting. That can kill a deal. And subsurface conditions that are unrelated to environmental but are more engineering in content, and that is maybe there's a lot of shallow bedrock. Maybe there's a
Mhm.
lot of shallow soils or fill materials on the site that are unsuitable for building things. So there's a variety of things that can be brought that we look at our firm at ECS as well as our allies in the industry. We're all looking at this site. We all want the deals to go through, right? That's our intent, and we just have to do our due diligence, engineering and environmental, and what have you.
Mhm. I didn't ask this on your previous questions, but what would you say is one of the most costly reports that you have written in the way of what it would mean to mitigate the site?
Oh, that's I get that question a lot, and I'll phrase it a different way. I get often asked, John, can you give me a proposal for a phase one and a phase two environmental site assessment? And the answer is always yes, but the I always caveat that with a question: what do you know?
Hmm.
Right? Because if you're asking me for a phase two environmental site assessment, you must know something. Because a phase two environmental site assessment can be as simple as one going out to the site and collecting one bit of soil sample for $1,000,
Hmm.
or it could be a complex assessment of test pits, monitoring wells, soil borings, a wide variety of soil samples analyzed for a countless amount of analytical parameters, where it could easily jump to 50 to 100,000. Right. So every site's unique on from a phase two perspective. And understanding those challenges is really important for redeveloping or acquiring real estate.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this segment of digging in the dirt, because that's really what you do. What is one thing that you wish all brokers or owners better understood about environmental assessments?
Um, Plan ahead. Understand what your client's looking for, understand their risk tolerance, because that can help understand how they're going to react if you suggest that they consider an environmental study. Every client of yours and ours has different risk tolerances, so the sooner you can engage, the better. To get a proposal for a phase one environmental site assessment, the most ubiquitous service line in the environmental consulting industry that impacts commercial real estate, is no cost.
Yeah,
Right? There's no
there's
cost.
no harm. Let's
There's
just,
no harm in having someone look at it,
yeah,
getting you a proposal that says, you know what, here's the cost, here's the schedule. Generally speaking, a phase one is going to be in that $1,800 to $3,500, depending on the site, the size, the complexity, etc. So those are the common price ranges, and I think we all agree if you're investing in real estate, it's wise to evaluate your risk.
right. Eyes wide open.
Eyes wide open.
Yep.
And the sooner you get it done, a lot of times you can address this with your client. What is your common period to close? Right? Typically, we might see 60 days,
Yeah.
maybe 90 days. Well, a due
Depends
diligence
on the property, right?
depends on the property, but we commonly see 60 days. Time is money. Time to market is critical. So, due diligence phase ones typically take about 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
And if there's concerns that are identified, it could take 3 to 5 to 6 to 8 weeks, depending on if and how we have to get regulators involved. And we're at their mercy at that point. So
Right.
the sooner you get a consultant involved, the more advantageous for a successful deal.
Well, those are good sage words of advice. And I thank you so much, John Lair, for being with me today.
Well,
And I'd
Emilee, I
love to
appreciate it.
have you back again and tell us some stories from the field so that we can always be better informed in our practice and for other commercial real estate owners. And for the audience out there, if you have any environmental concerns about your property, let's talk about the best way to approach them. I want to be your resource for navigating all things commercial real estate. So thanks again, John, and we will see you soon.